whatever we've got. Worst things in the world happen having an inconsistent naming convention for files. While that's doing its job, let's go ahead and share the screen that we are going to be starting. Put that over there. I think we're pretty good. All right, not too bad. Less than a minute this time. Now, when it works, it works. Give it just another minute now that YouTube is up for people to log in who are using that system. Others that are joining exactly at 12 in the Zoom system. Just wait for that magic 12:01 to kick around, and then we'll dive in. I guess I can get a little bit of housekeeping at the beginning. Next week, I will not be available for our class. So next week's Wednesday class will not take place. We will have one more class before Pesach, which will be the following week, the last week of March. And that will finish up our discussion of Pesach for this session. So we're going to do Pesach today, no class next week, and then Pesach the following week. And then we'll actually be in Pesach. And well, when it's a Chag, obviously, on a day of Chag, we're not going to be having class because, well, we'll be celebrating in services. All right. So let's go ahead and dive in for today. Well, I say dive in, but I have to give a little bit of a preamble and explanation. So last time we discussed the Seder plate itself, a little bit about its origin, its evolution, about how it came from a different set of circumstances than people often understand, and how we have created many repeated teachings about it, but often without that deeper understanding of its history and origin, we are missing out on a lot. And we're going to continue that discussion today, looking at matzah and the Seder itself. I don't know how much of that we're going to get through, but we are going to continue to untangle things that people maybe take for granted. Now, I know for some people this rubs them the wrong way. They've learned what they learned, whether it was at their family Seder or at religious school, or some rabbi they met in college who told them something. And once they've learned it, and they are happy to know it, but they don't want to examine it or question it. And I get that feeling. I understand it. One does not want to deconstruct every belief and understanding every single time. However, there is a fundamental short-sightedness to that opinion. While I don't say that people need to wake up each morning and re-examine every held belief every single day, if we are only holding beliefs that have been handed to us rather than ones that we have unearthed ourselves, then we are going to have a rather tenuous understanding of whatever it might be. And to help us with that concept, we're actually going to start in a non-Jewish source. We're going to look at two quotes taken from John Stuart Mill in his book on liberty. So John Stuart Mill was one of the great thinkers of liberal. That's liberal non-politically, meaning not left or right of center or favoring one political party or another, but liberal in the classic philosophical sense about providing as much liberty to the individual as possible vis-a-vis their relationship with each other and with the state, with the government. And in his book on liberty, the whole first section is about the right for free speech, or what we would call free speech, the freeness to express opinions which are considered counter to the norm, the ones that are understood to be true by the majority of the country or the population you're in. And in the process of discussing why that should be a freedom, and we should never take it for granted that it is, he also talks about why it is advantageous for people even who are right, meaning that why should somebody that is right, that knows the truth, feel that there might be benefit from allowing people who are wrong and they believe absolutely, and are not wrong about this, but they know that other person is wrong, why should we allow other people that are wrong to speak their opinion, which is obviously wrong? And again, he goes through this in much more detail than we will today. If there's interest, I'd love to lead a class through the overlap between Jewish opinions on how debate and discussion is meant to be handled, and what Mill sets forward in this book. That's on the back burner for another time if people would like. But what he is trying to establish here is that even if you know you are right, even if it is verifiable that you are right, such as the world is round, we still benefit. That is to say, those holders of the right opinion still benefit from hearing those with wrong opinions. Now, that's counterintuitive to most people, which is why it's such a tall order, I think. But let's go through a couple of his explanations. He goes into much more detail, and I highly recommend, you can easily find his book in public domain. If you're not familiar with the Gutenberg Project, spelled like the printer, then please make yourself avail yourself of it. The Gutenberg Project is one of the first, earliest, and most long-lasting projects of the internet to put public domain books into a text format that is easily accessible to people no matter where they are, so that all of these amazing aspects of our literature, of thought, of science could be at everybody's disposal, which is really one of the blessings the internet is meant to give us, rather than what we often use it for. Okay, so let's get down to his arguments on why somebody who knows the truth might still benefit from hearing something that is wrong. There is a class of persons, happily not quite so numerous as formerly, who think it enough if a person undoubtingly assents undoubtingly to what they think true, though he has no knowledge whatever of the grounds of the opinion, and could not make a tenable defense of it against the most superficial objections. All right, now, I personally love 19th century writing, and I love the turn of phrase, but I know that it can be a little clunky compared to modern 21st century English. So let me just give a few explanatory notes as we go through. So what he is saying is there are plenty of people who they just want to know that what they know is true, and they don't know why it's true. They couldn't possibly defend it as being true. They have no actual explanation. In modern psychology, we call this the illusion of explanatory depth. I'll go back to my example earlier about the world being round. If you ask the average person what shape the world is, they'll tell you round. If you ask them how they could prove it, they will stare at you blankly. And well, he considers this to be a problem. Even though what they know is true, the world is round, the fact is they don't know why it is round, and they don't know how to prove that it is round. Now, when we get into questions of religion and morality, I think you can begin to see why this is more problematic. For example, if somebody was to say that all people are created equal, that's a wonderful opinion, and one that I happen to believe is true. But many people, if asked, well, why? How do you know that's true? Would be a deer in headlights at that point. They would not be able to marshal any examples or proofs of why all people are equal is a true statement. Indeed, it was considered quite difficult for many people, such to the point that our own Declaration of Independence said these truths are self-evident, meaning we're not going to explain why they're true because we're not 100% sure we can, or that everybody would even welcome such an explanation. More people are interested in gathering a catechism where they simply say, I believe this with perfect faith, and I have no idea why, but I believe it, and that's all that I need. And this is what he's saying is a problem. Now, since they can't make an argument about this, well, what is this person like? Well, such persons, if they can once get their creed taught from authority, naturally think that no good and some harm comes of it being allowed to be questioned. Hey, my rabbi taught me this. Why should I have to listen to somebody challenge it? I mean, it's not going to teach me any better because I already know the truth, and I might, confuse me. So why should I even allow somebody to ask a question that is hinting at something that is counter? Where their influence prevails, where they're the majority, this type of attitude they make it nearly impossible for the received opinion to be rejected wisely and considerately. After all, if they're the dominant group, then nobody is able to discuss this with them sensibly because they keep getting shouted down of how dare you even question it, though it may still be rejected rashly and ignorantly. Welcome to the internet. For to shut out discussion entirely is seldom possible, and when it once gets in, beliefs not grounded on conviction are apt to give way before the slightest semblance of an argument. So, yeah, people are still going to make counter arguments, and it's very hard to shut down all dissent. And if the vast majority of people don't even know why what they are claiming to believe is true, then those counter arguments are going to cause significant damage when they come in, especially if they are presented rashly and ignorantly to people that are deciding rashly and ignorantly. Indeed, we see this in the modern world where people will question concepts such as all people being equal, whether it be across race, religion, gender, or other forms of identity. And people who don't know why that is true are often able to be peeled off from that core belief by people who make spurious arguments that could easily be knocked down if the person claiming that they believe all people are equal had actually understood why that tenet was ever originally established. But since they can't, they will fall prey to the manipulative posturing and sophistry of those that are trying to assault, to erode those kinds of beliefs. So, waiving, however, this possibility, assuming, excuse me, distraction popping up on my screen. Waiving, however, this possibility, assuming that true opinions abides in the mind, but abides as a prejudice, a belief independent and proof against argument, this is not the way in which truth ought to be held by rational beings. This is not knowing the truth. Truth, thus held, is but one superstition the more, accidentally clinging to the words which enunciate a truth. So again, I personally just love his writing, but let me make sure that everybody understands what he is claiming here. He is saying, look, even if we discount the idea that claiming to believe something without understanding it is a very weak form of belief that could easily be toppled, even if that wasn't an issue. Let's imagine that they believe it so strongly that even if somebody presented amazingly persuasive arguments, they would still say, I believe, and march forward. There's still the problem where when we say, I believe the truth, that I hold to a truth, we want that to mean more than I have remembered the words that are the statement of that truth. The student who can remember a squared plus b squared equals c squared because they were drilled, that was drilled into them in their geometry, but doesn't know what that actually means when looking at a triangle, and all the more so wouldn't know how to use it if they were trying to measure something for their home and in a construction project. Well, they may know the truth, they may say the truth, but they say it as almost like a superstition, as an incantation. All people are created equal. All people are created equal. If I just say this over and over again, I am proof against all of the assaults that might come against this belief, but I have no idea what it actually means. It becomes just a superstition. And yes, what you are espousing is a true statement, but in your heart, it's not actually held as truth. It's held merely as a superstitious incantation. And that is not what we aspire to. That is not where we hope to, what we hope to achieve. Next week, or sorry, not next week, because we don't have class next week. The following week, I'll bring a Jewish source that comes to also corroborate this idea. But I thought it was nicer to put that as a bookend, so you're going to have to wait until the end of part 2. Now, he brings one more statement on this point. Well, he brings a lot more statement, but one more that I wanted to share this morning. Thirdly, as he does his recap of why listening and allowing erroneous opinions to be shared is important, even if the received opinion be not only true, but the whole truth, meaning it's not just a question that I need to listen to other people because they might know a few things I don't, even if I know the majority. But even if I know 100% of the truth, the world is round. There's really no room to talk flatness here. unless it is suffered to be, and actually is vigorously and earnestly contested, it will, by most of those who receive it, be held in the manner of prejudice, with little comprehension or feeling of its rational grounds. That is to say, similar to the earlier statement, you'll know it only in the sense that you can repeat it, but you won't actually have a feeling or comprehension of what it truly means. And not only this, but fourthly, the problems that he's enumerating, the meaning of the doctrine itself will be in danger of being lost or enfeebled and deprived of its vital effect on the character and conduct, the dogma becoming a mere formal profession, meaning I'll just say it, inefficacious for good, but cumbering for the ground and preventing the growth of any real and heartfelt conviction from reason or personal experience. And this is what's going to lead us into our discussion of the Seder today, which is to say, there is a very real danger, and one that I have witnessed firsthand with some people that I have met, where the Seder becomes a catechism, where it becomes a simple recitation. You go through it because that's what you do, and you say the words because those are the words, and you just march your way through it until you get to the end. And when you're done, you close the Haggadah and you say, I did the Seder. But what feeling was there? What passion, what vital effect, to use Mill's language, did the Seder have on you? How did it change? Was there any real or heartfelt conviction in this experience? Or is it merely something that was done and its overall execution is what makes you feel good rather than the content of the Seder itself? Are you feeling good because you did the Seder and that's what Jews do, and you did it the way Jews are supposed to do it, which is mere performance? Or did you actually feel something during the process? And the Seder in particular, even more than any other, I think I'd be willing to go on record, any other Jewish activity is predicated on the idea of generating feeling, on generating a true vital effect of firing our blood and gaining our sympathy, of causing us to weep, of causing us to laugh, that it is designed as an experience, not merely as a recitation. And yet too often it becomes a recitation. And part of that reason is because we misunderstand the origin of its different elements, and we fail to look beyond those elements to what they were intended to create within us through that experience. Okay, so that's my preamble. And I thank John Stuart Mill for his beautiful words to help me along in this idea. Again, as I mentioned, the end of our next session in 2 weeks' time, we'll be looking at a Jewish author who summarizes this also in a very powerful, beautiful way, and also from the 19th century. What can I say? They had some writers there. And in the meantime, we're going to look first at the concept of the matzah that we put on the plate, on the table. And then we'll also begin our discussion of the Seder itself by looking back at the first full enumeration of the Seder, which is to say the Mishnah. Okay, so let's begin with our question of matzah. Okay, so everybody knows that matzah is the bread of affliction. And yes, I'll pause now so you can make any jokes you wish about the affliction on our digestive tract. But that term, lechem oni, the poor's bread, is actually meant to create a particular experience during the Seder. And in the earliest days, we actually made the Seder very much feel different around this concept of lechem oni. What we would do is we would take 2 loaves. Now, loaf, anytime we're talking about matzah, means a sheet of matzah. I know that in American English, we think of loaf as being a big puffy thing. Loaf just means a whole portion of something, as opposed to a broken piece of it. So we always start with 2 loaves on Shabbat or on any other holiday or Chag, because we are commemorating the Lechem Mishneh, the double portion of manna that we received during the Exodus. And that double portion came when it was the eve of a holiday, especially Shabbat, so that on the holiday itself, we would not need to go out and gather. So in commemoration of God's generosity and of understanding that even though we are curtailing our work, we are still provided for on Shabbat and holidays, we have 2 loaves at each of our meals. as a way of having that reminder. Again, this is one of those things where people might know we have two loaves, but they forget that every time we uncover and notice them sitting there, that we are reminding ourselves of God's support in the desert, but most importantly, God's continued support, that really life is tenable without working 7 days a week. You don't have to hustle constantly. You don't have to grind constantly. That is not why God put us on earth. So we normally have two loaves. Well, how do we then exemplify this notion of poverty and affliction with the notion of lechem oni for Pesach? It's not just that the bread itself is less tasty. While many people in the modern world will consider that, people ate matzah, that is to say, unleavened bread, routinely throughout the normal year in most of the ancient and classical world. It was a quick and easy way to make bread. You didn't always have time, especially before modern yeast was cultured, to really facilitate the puffing of bread. You didn't have time to wait around for things to leaven, and so you would just make flat bread, and that was considered a wonderful, wonderful thing to be able to eat throughout most of the year. So it wasn't just matzah itself that is the bread of affliction. So we needed another way to exemplify the affliction and the poverty that it reflects. And so what we did was we broke one of our loaves and we hid the half of it, which would become the afikomen. Now, that means for most of the Seder, we would have only 1.5 loaves on our table. Our table would literally look poorer than it would for any other holiday or for any other Shabbat. We would be hiding part of it in order to generate that feeling of, man, this is terrible. I've got less, right? Normal Shabbat, I've got 2. Now I've only got 1.5. This is what it feels like to not have enough. This is what it feels like to be poor. This is what it feels like to be a slave when you don't have enough to support yourself. And this meant that we would constantly be reminded, just by seeing that 1.5 loaves of matzah on the table, constantly reminded that we are being redeemed on this night, that we are going through an experience where we have less and we will end with abundance, that we will start off poor and we will end feeling rich. That doesn't work if you don't have the reduction. All right, now, you're probably sitting there going, but wait a minute, Rabbi. Don't we normally have 3 slices, 3 loaves of matzah on our plates for the Seder these days? And the answer is absolutely yes. Because we see the 3 loaves that we currently use is a compromise. It is a way to try and reconcile 2 different and essentially conflicting halachic requirements. So the one that I mentioned before, lechem mishneh, is this idea that we should have 2 loaves, which represents the extra bounty that God gave us to provide for our Shabbat and holidays. And on Passover, we are meant to have lechem oni, which means we're supposed to have a broken piece. Well, if I break one of my 2, then now I'm only at 1.5. That means I'm lower than the 2 that I'm supposed to be using to remind myself of what God had blessed me with. So how do I get around that? Very simple. I add a 3rd complete loaf, a 3rd whole loaf, a 3rd sheet. And then when I break one, I still have done lechem oni. I have reduced one of my loaves, and that allows me to have that feeling of deprivation and of sympathy for the poor. But I also still have 2 complete loaves, which means I'm also fulfilling the idea of lechem mishneh that God had provided so that we are able to enjoy the holiday rather than having to work on it. So this is, by the way, the reason why we break the middle matzah, which is considered to be one of the first 2 original matzahs. And so we are diminishing the first 2 in order to have the lechem oni, but we keep that 3rd in order not to have too little and not be fulfilling lechem mishneh. So it is a classic example of a Jewish compromise. And when it is understood in all of that detail, when somebody understands why they have 3 and take from the middle and then hide it and can see the 1.5 as being representative of lechem oni and see that third one as being representative of lechem mishneh, then we can bring these two ideas together and they can share space on the table. It's almost as though mentally, if you were to color code each of the matzahs, so that you had two that were blue and one that was green, and you break one of the blue, so the 1.5 blue is your lechem oni, but then your blue and green full loaves are your lechem mishneh. This would perhaps allow a person to more easily visualize what is trying to be achieved through the use of three matzot. The fact is, though, that this is hard because you end up with 2.5 loaves for most of the Seder. And, well, 2.5 is more than a regular Shabbat. It's more than a regular festival like Sukkot or Shavuot. So at the end, this compromise, to somebody who hasn't examined it in detail, like we're doing now, actually ends up completely subverting the idea of lechem oni, that we are reliving the feeling of affliction or that we are gaining sympathy for the afflicted. Instead, we actually end up with more than usual right from the beginning. Even though we broke one, it's still 2.5. We're still ahead of the game. And that underlying spirit of this act, which is right up there at the beginning of the Seder, is really quite wasted at most Seder tables because we missed that. And yes, it's nice that we have added another layer of meaning, 3 matzvot representing the unity of the 3 Jewish divisions, Kohen, Levi, and Yisrael. Beautiful teaching, wonderful way to help add extra meaning to something that was added as a compromise. And the whole idea of having 3 be the 3 representatives is definitely a late addition. I'm got no problem with late additions, like I mentioned in last week's discussion. But if we miss that underlying original concept, that the matzah is there not by its taste and not by its digestive problems to afflict us because of its diminishment, then how do we feel that we are being saved? How do we feel that we are being redeemed? How do we have sympathy for those that are slaves? How do we have sympathy for those that are poor? Because we haven't even been willing to visually reduce what we are about to enjoy. And as such, many people will walk right through this section of the Haggadah, break one of the matzot, stick a half away for the afikomen, and act like nothing happened. And while they have done the requirement of what we do for the Seder, they have missed out on actually having it impact them so that they feel different than before they broke it, other than ticking the box. All right. Hopefully that gives an idea of what we're trying to go for here. And to show you how this can be an issue, we're going to walk our way through the Haggadah. And we're going to jump at a certain point to a commentary on it, and then we'll come back and continue our discussion. So bear with me when we jump. But I want to show you what the Seder looked like 2,000 years ago, when the Mishnah was being compiled, which was based upon the teachings of our people for the previous hundreds of years, but it was compiled around the year 250 in the Common Era. This is what they described. And you'll see some elements that are similar to what we talked about last time. And you'll see some elements that might sound very different than our modern Seder. Good. It's meant to be. I mean, that is to say, the Seder is never supposed to be the same thing every year. And the fact that we've reduced it to a liturgy rather than an experience is part of the problem that this course is well, chipping away at. I don't delude myself to think that we'll have the ability to cover everything. Okay, so here we are in Pesachim chapter 10 in the Mishnah. And like always, I'll send you off to Sefaria, sefaria.org. Wonderful website, huge compilation of Jewish texts, easily accessible, all cross-referenced, and many things with excellent translations, even with multiple translations for some things, like the Mishnah. So you're welcome to go to Pesachim and look it up. You'll find that this is the last chapter of the entire section dealing with Pesach. And that means there are 9 chapters dealing with things other than the Seder. While many people consider the Seder the pinnacle of what we do for Passover, that's not what the Mishnah focuses on. It focuses on the question of chametz, of how we search and remove chametz, the leavening from our homes, it also focuses extensively on how we do the sacrifice for Passover, of how the lamb would have been offered in the ancient and classical eras. So it's only in chapter 10, the final chapter, that we get these few words that try to explain what we do at home once everything else has been gotten right. All right, so part one, or Mishnah 1, is the terminology we use for each paragraph of the Mishnah in a chapter. On the eve of Pesach, close to Mincha, one may not eat until nightfall. So we stop eating earlier in the afternoon in order that by the time we get to our Seder, we actually have an appetite. The sages understood that we should feel a little ravenous. Like I said before, if people are asking, when do we eat? You did your job right, because we're supposed to hit the actual meal, especially the matzah, with gusto, rather than just being, oh, I've got to eat matzah. It's supposed to be, finally, I get to eat something. And even if it's matzah, it tastes amazing because you're actually properly hungry. The only way to ensure that, of course, is to stop eating earlier in the day. Even the poorest person in Israel must not eat on the night of Pesach until he reclines. So, like we talked about with the idea of Mr. Bean, of those sofas, the lounge chairs that people would use, they wanted to emphasize that on the night of Pesach, even if every other night you are normally forced to struggle and toil, we need to find a way to help them be able to recline. And they should give him not less than 4 cups of wine, even from the tamchui, from the charity plate, meaning that we have to make sure that everybody has enough so that even the poorest person can have 4 cups of wine, where they might not normally be able to afford more than 1, or maybe not even that. The community has to make sure that everybody can have that experience. So you can see the feeling of Pesach is already beginning before Pesach begins, before the Seder begins, that a person has to already change how they're eating so that while they're going through the Seder, they are properly hungry. That's an experience of deprivation, of slavery, of poverty. And we have to make sure that somebody who is poor, we have provided in advance so that when they are experiencing Passover, they are experiencing the liberty, the redemptive qualities that Passover is meant to offer. Mishnah 2. They mix him the first cup. All right, so first of all, just a little aside, you may think of this as pouring the first cup, and that's perfectly fine for our modern shelf stable ready wine. In the ancient world, the classical world, wine didn't come like that. Wine was more of a concentrate, and you would pull some of the winey syrup concentrate out of your big amphora, your big clay pot, and then you would add water to it and mix to your taste. So you would mix a level of strength that you wanted your wine, both flavor as well as alcohol. So that's why we actually mix the wine rather than pour it in the language of the Seder. Perfectly fine to use modern table wines. That's great and very convenient. Do check that they are kosher for Passover. And also understand that if you find drinking 4 cups of wine too difficult, that it's makes it hard for you to stay focused for the remainder of the Seder, by all means, you are allowed to still mix it with water. So you can reduce the potency of your wine with water, and you're doing just fine. Now, Beit Shammai, one of the great schools of thought of the early centuries of the Common Era, say, first he blesses over the day and then over the wine. Beit Hillel says, no, first he blesses over the wine and then over the day, which indeed Beit Hillel wins, as they usually do. This is why we say the Borei Pri Hagafen over the wine first, and then we say the blessing for the one who has sanctified to this day, the longer paragraph text of what we call the Kiddush. So this, again, is a good reminder that even in the days of the Second Temple period, there was still debate and discussion about exactly how this was meant to go. And going back to good old John Stuart Mill that we talked about a few minutes ago, you can see that Judaism has no problem having competing opinions on the same page, and that those debates and discussions were absolutely welcome and considered to be blessed. Good. Part 3. They bring it in front of him. Aha! What are we talking about here? Here's where we get our little table. Here's where we get our Seder table. Remember our discussion last week, and for those of you who might not have been here, I will scroll back up. You would have a table put in front of you, usually a little side table looking thing that you would then eat from. And so that was how they did it in the Mishnah time. There we are. And that's what the Mishnah is describing. And then he dips the lettuce, which is what we call in the modern term, is what we would call the karpas. Most people use parsley, but it is fine to use any green. And then he does that until he reaches the appetizer that precedes the bread, meaning that you're able to snack on these greens. Why? Because they were considered an aid to whetting the appetite. The more you ate of this, the more hungry you would feel by the time you got to the matzah. I don't know if that's entirely true for the average person, but that is the opinion that this is bringing. They then bring before him matzah, lettuce, and haroset. Now, remember, lettuce is the proper maror, the proper bitter herb, not iceberg lettuce, but a bitter romaine, if you can find it. Most romaine now has been hybridized to be very not bitter. So I do recommend finding something like endives or arugula or dandelion greens, another green that is actually bitter, far preferred to horseradish. And haroset, that which we dip it into. Though haroset is not mandatory, Rabbi Elazar, son of Rabbi Tzadok, says it is mandatory, and in the temple they bring the body of the Pesach before him. All right, so there's a debate in the ancient world of whether or not you had to have haroset or not. We eventually end up on the idea that we need to have haroset, but we do not consider it to be a biblically mandated element of the Seder. It is something the rabbis instituted so that the bitterness of the maror would be counterbalanced at least a little by the sweetness of the haroset. And then the temple, in the temple days, when we offered sacrifices, the Pesach would come before, and Pesach is the technical term for that actual sacrifice. That is to say, the Pesach was the body of the lamb, was the meat that would be then eaten as part of the Seder. So all of these things are then brought out, and they mix him a second cup. And here the son questions his father. So we've got our second cup of wine poured in the modern terminology. Like I said, for them, they would be mixing it, and then the son questions his father. All right. Well, first of all, you'll notice the son questioning the father, and as we'll read through it, we don't actually see a four sons question here, or four sons section. This looks a lot more like Manashtana. And indeed, that is what it is. But hold on to your hats, because we will get a hint at the four sons, and we will get a different set of questions than you might be used to. If the son lacks the intelligence to ask, there's one of the sons. His father instructs him. How different this night is from all other nights. Notice that in the original, this is not considered to be a question. This is an exclamation, an interjection. Wow, boy, notice how different things are. We would hope that the kids would notice these things on their own, but if they don't, we draw their attention to them. Notice that is predicated on the idea that the Seder feels different. So it has to be done in an organic and living way so that there is some element of change and disruption. Now, how different this night is from all the nights. What's different about it? On all of the nights, we eat chametz and matzah. Tonight, only matzah. Again, a reminder that matzah was eaten year-round. On all of the nights, we eat other vegetables. Tonight, only bitter herbs. There we go. That's familiar. On all of the nights, we eat meat roasted, boiled, or cooked. Tonight, only roasted. Wait a minute. We don't say that anymore. That's referring to the way that the Passover sacrifice had to be cooked. On all of the nights, we dip once. Tonight, twice. Wait a minute. That's also different, because our current version of the Seder says that on all other nights, we don't dip at all, and tonight we dip twice, because how often people dipped during their normal meal process is something that is culturally changing. And at different times in history, we've had different patterns of eating, and this reflects the pattern because it was meant to reflect what actually was happening around the people at the Seder. That's why the children would be able to notice it. And you may also notice nothing is talking about reclining here. Now, we talked about reclining in Mishnah 1, but we're not putting reclining into the 4 questions because we had instead our question about the cooking. Now, again, we also notice that doesn't say officially how many questions it needs to be. And in fact, this is meant to merely open up the process to help the kid understand some of the things that they should be noticing, and that it's okay to ask questions, that the child should realize that asking questions is good. Again, going back to our friend John Stuart Mill, the whole point is that you create an opening for counter opinions, and you don't consider them to be offensive or rude or somehow degrading the truth that is being shared. But through that question, you and the person who asked become gain a deeper understanding of the truth that is meant to be the important element of what it is you're doing. Now, we continue on, and according to the intellect of the son, again, another hint towards what would eventually become our 4 sons section, the father instructs it. He begins with shame and concludes with praise. Now, that doesn't mean about how you treat the child. Beginning with shame and concluding with praise is a reminder of the pattern of how we describe the story of the Exodus. Once we were slaves, and now we are free. And expounds from, and if you want to use a set text, then use Deuteronomy 6:20-25. A wandering Aramean was my father. There are multiple translations of that. We're not going to get into it today until he completes that section. So this is a section that is easier for people to remember. It is part of the proclamation that a person would make when they were bringing the first fruits to the temple. So it has deep personal value to the average person because it is celebrating the fulfillment of God's promise to us to have a land where we could grow and thrive. So there's a lot of emotional resonance in this little phrase, and we can then break it down through the way it describes our journey into Egypt and then out. It is possible to break that down, as the traditional Haggadah does, into a way that uncovers many of the lessons of the story. Now, people who recite this in the modern world will often recite it in the modern world, and they will rattle off the explanation for each word as though it was just part of one cohesive text, when in fact it is meant to be an explanation of the text, meaning that we are supposed to read the text and analyze it. We are given an example of a traditional way of explaining the text, but that is not the only way to understand it, nor do we fulfill our true responsibility by merely reciting that explanation. Quoting someone else's explanation of the Declaration of Independence doesn't mean you understand the Declaration of Independence. Referring to their explanation can help you, which is why it's there, but just reading it isn't good enough. And in fact, many people will read it and fail to catch the actual meaning. And we're going to look at an example of a rabbi doing exactly that. So we're turning now to the Talmud, Psachim 116a, the last section of the Talmud, which follows chapter 10 of the Mishnah, is where we find so much of the rabbinic discussion about the Seder, and many examples. And here is one that I think you'll understand and is hopefully going to underscore my point for this entire session. It was taught in the Mishnah that the father begins with disgrace and concludes with glory. Hey, we just read that. The Gemara asks, meaning the layer of the later rabbis who wrote to the Talmud have their own debate about what that means. What is the meaning of the term with disgrace? Now, first of all, notice just by having that question, they're already introducing that they don't think that just reading the text is good enough. because after all, the rest of the Mishnah gave us an example text, which begins with disgrace and concludes with glory. So why would you even ask the question, what does it mean to begin with disgrace, if it was answered by just read Deuteronomy 6? Because they thought we needed to tell the story more organically. Rav, one of the sages, said that one should begin by saying, at first our forefathers were idol worshippers, before concluding with words of glory. And Shmuel said, the disgrace with which one should begin his answer is, we were slaves. All right, so you can already see that there is a debate, which is excellent, because like John Stuart Mill, we like debate. And one is saying that our original disgrace was that we worshipped idols, and the other is saying our original disgrace is that we were slaves. Now, we don't shy from either of those, and both can be mentioned, as we just did by reading this section in the Talmud. Again, as Mill points out, it's important to recognize that truth is often held in different proportions by multiple people, and only by putting them together do we find more truth. So each one of them is saying something true, and they are not competing, they are adding. But we can see that this explanation is meant to not shy away from our difficult beginning. Now, we then get an anecdote. This is something that happened, and we'll see what we're meant to learn from this. Rav Nachman said to his servant Daru. Now, what is Daru? Well, first of all, you may be thinking, I don't think Daru sounds like a very Jewish name, right? It's not exactly a Jewish name. This is probably a foreigner. And this translation is probably being generous with the term servant, because the word for servant is the same word as slave. So Daru is almost certainly a slave of Rav Nachman. And there were absolutely still slaves at this time. Now, it wasn't the same as chattel slavery in the Americas, but that doesn't mean we should feel happy or comfortable with it. Slavery is still a problem, and as we're going to see, well, this story reveals a little bit of a problem. So Rav Nachman says to his servant, or his slave Daru, with regard to a slave who was freed by his master, who gives him gold and silver, a parting gift, what should the slave say to him? All right, so Rav Nachman is including Daru in the discussion of the Haggadah. Let's work out, like, if you were a slave and somebody freed you, what would you feel? What would you say? Right? Would you just be like a good riddance or about time? What should the attitude be? Because Rav Nachman is trying to get a firsthand experience from somebody that is actually enslaved to understand the emotion that the Israelites had when God freed them from Egypt, right? Because Rav Nachman's never been a slave, so he's looking for a reality check from a real slave. What would you feel if somebody actually emancipated you? And Daru said, he must thank and praise his master. Okay, very good. He said to him, Rav Nachman moves on, if so, you have exempted us from reciting the questions of Manish Tanah, meaning why is this night so different? As you have stated the essence of the Seder night. Rav Nachman immediately began to recite Avadim Hayinu, the next portion of the telling, we were slaves. Rav Nachman is tone deaf. Rav Nachman is missing the point of the Seder. He has just asked a slave, how would you feel if you were freed? And the slave gave an honest and probably gleeful answer of, there would be like no end to my level of gratitude, no end to my level of thanks. And Rav Nachman is like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I bet that is how you would feel and what you would say. I have a better understanding of what our ancestors felt as slaves. Anyway, let's now talk about, we were slaves. Avadim hayinu hayin. While the slave is still standing there. Rav Nachman could have emancipated him right then. He could have freed Daru. He could have allowed Daru to go free. The irony of sitting there at a Seder, asking a slave for his opinion without recognizing the slave's feelings is very, very painful to watch. And I think that this is one of the ways, and many places this happens in the Talmud, where the editors will slip in anecdotes and explanations that are meant to give us a little extra cut to make us feel, to wince at our own occasional hypocrisy and blindness, and to go back to our original discussion that sometimes we're just saying things and we're not actually thinking about them. We don't understand them. And even when we act like we're trying to understand it, such as asking a real slave what manumission would feel like, we miss the point that there is a real person in front of us experiencing this. And the lesson of the Seder is that we are meant to free slaves, that we are not meant to put up with this. This is not meant to be a normal, natural condition for the world. And while we as 21st century students can recognize that there were different attitudes at different times, and that the process of moving Jews away from being involved in slavery was long, but was faster than many other cultures, and we can be proud of that, we have to recognize as well that sometimes we say words without really thinking about them. Sometimes we say things without really thinking about real people. And this is very much, even from the words of somebody as great as Rav Nachman, an example of somebody who could be literally staring a slave in the face, could literally be hearing in their voice what emancipation would mean to them, and then just move on to the next section of the Seder without taking the step of having it impact the way they will act, of the way they will live. Rav Nachman could have, at this moment, recognized how horrible it must be for Daru to sit here during the midst of a feast where we are celebrating our freedom from slavery while Daru is still a slave. And he could have said, you know what, Daru, give me some time. I'm going to put together a package for your emancipation. You know, he could have done something to acknowledge the position that Daru was in and help him out of this situation. But he was caught up in the performance of the mitzvah. He was caught up in the performance of the Seder. He was caught up in the words and in the study and in the theory, in the abstract. And as such, it kept the vital element of the Seder from penetrating. And the Seder itself tells us that even if we were all great sages, we must still retell the story in a meaningful way in order that we actually fulfill the responsibility of the Seder. If we merely tell it in this detached, academic, or overly personalized without recognizing the broader implication sort of manner, then we failed. Or at the very least, we're not getting a perfect score for what we were able to do at our Seder. So we will return to our discussion of the Seder itself in the words of the Mishnah next time. And remember, that's in 2 weeks. And we will also look at other Jewish sources that try to help us realize how we move a concept from just being a thought into being part of our soul, and as part of our soul, as part of our life and how we live. But we will save more of that till next time. Again, 2 weeks from now. And I look forward to continuing this discussion and hope that it will inspire deep discussion, lots of controversy, and a very meaningful Seder that leads to very meaningful action in your life.